As I stepped into the church, I couldn't help but notice the pastor's wife, Mrs. Smith. She was a woman in her late 30s, with a warm smile and piercing brown eyes. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a gentle hug, making me feel welcome and at ease. I had just moved to the city and was looking for a new church to attend. A friend had recommended the Holy Assembly, and I was eager to check it out. As I took my seat, I couldn't help but notice the vibrant atmosphere of the church. The worship team was lively, the congregation was enthusiastic, and the pastor's sermon was inspiring. But as the days went by, I began to notice something strange. Mrs. Smith seemed to be everywhere, always smiling, always chatting with the men of the church. She would often touch their arms or pat their backs, and they would look at her with admiration and respect. At first, I thought nothing of it. I assumed she was just being friendly and hospitable. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to feel a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the way Mrs. Smith interacted with the men of the church. It was the way they looked at her, the way they talked about her. They would often comment on her beauty, her grace, and her kindness. They would talk about how she was always there for them, how she would listen to their problems and offer them advice. And they would often joke about how lucky the pastor was to have such a wonderful wife. But as I listened to their conversations, I started to feel a growing sense of doubt. Was Mrs. Smith really as righteous and God-fearing as she seemed? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind, but they kept coming back. I started to notice little things about Mrs. Smith's behavior, things that didn't quite add up. She would often disappear during the service, only to return with a mysterious smile on her face. And she would often receive phone calls during the week, calls that would leave her looking flushed and excited. I didn't know what to make of it all. Part of me wanted to believe that Mrs. Smith was innocent, that she was just a kind and caring person who was devoted to her husband and her church. But another part of me was screaming warning signs, telling me that something was seriously wrong. As the tension built up inside me, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and watch as Mrs. Smith continued to charm and deceive the men of the church. I had to confront her, to ask her what was really going on. But as I approached her after the service, I felt a sense of trepidation. What if I was wrong? What if Mrs. Smith was really as innocent as she seemed? I took a deep breath and asked her if I could talk to her for a minute. "Of course," she said, smiling sweetly at me. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, unsure of how to phrase my question. But then I looked in her eyes, and I saw something there that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Smith," I said,